The sun was setting over the meticulously manicured lawns of Cypress Grove, a suburban paradise where families thrived, children played, and HOA rules reigned supreme. Sarah had moved into the neighborhood just a few months ago, looking for a fresh start. She'd spent weeks researching the area, ensuring that it offered the right mix of peace, security, and community. It was perfect, almost too perfect. Sarah stood at the front window of her new home, watching as her son, Timmy, wheeled himself down the driveway. He was only 10 years old, but his independence was hard-won. Born with cerebral palsy, Timmy relied on a custom-built wheelchair to get around. His small, yet powerful frame glided smoothly across the pavement, the wheels humming quietly in the evening air. Sarah's heart swelled with pride. Timmy had fought so hard to be like every other child, to play outside, to enjoy simple freedoms. The neighborhood was silent except for the sounds of distant laughter and the chirping of birds, but there was one voice that always felt a little too close, always too scrutinizing: the voice of Karen, the HOA president. Sarah had met Karen a few days after moving in. At first, Karen had seemed like the friendly, welcoming type. She'd handed Sarah a packet of community rules and regulations with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "We take pride in keeping things beautiful around here," she had said, her voice dripping with thinly veiled condescension. "We believe in keeping everything orderly." It was a tone that left Sarah uneasy, but she chalked it up to the overzealous nature of someone who just took their job too seriously. Now, as Sarah watched Timmy glide down the street, she saw Karen standing at the corner of the block, her eyes fixed on them. A slow, calculating smile spread across Karen's face as she adjusted her sunglasses. Sarah immediately felt a chill crawl down her spine. Karen had a way of appearing when she wasn't wanted, watching, waiting, like a predator studying its prey. Timmy didn't notice. He was too busy exploring the neighborhood, his attention focused on a butterfly flitting nearby. Sarah, however, could feel Karen's gaze like a weight on her shoulders, the air thick with expectation. Without warning, Karen approached, her steps deliberate and slow, as if she was taking her time to build a sense of dread. Sarah tensed. There was something in the way Karen moved that made her feel like she was about to be cornered. "Nice afternoon," Karen said, her voice smooth, but edged with something else, something colder. "I see your son's enjoying his freedom." Sarah smiled tightly. "Yes, Timmy loves to be outside. He doesn't get that much time to play." Karen's eyes flicked to the wheelchair, narrowing slightly. "It's certainly an interesting chair," she remarked, as if trying to choose her words carefully. "But you know, this is a residential area. It's a little out of place in the community space." Sarah's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" she asked, already sensing where this was going. Karen leaned in just a little closer, her tone dropping a fraction. "I'm just saying, the HOA has guidelines about things like appearance. There are standards we have to maintain here. For the sake of the neighborhood." Her gaze lingered on the wheelchair, the implication unmistakable. The smile that had been so warm just moments ago was now gone, replaced by something colder, more calculating. Sarah's stomach tightened. "Timmy's wheelchair is his lifeline," she said, voice steady but the tension rising. "It's not just an accessory. It's essential for him to move around." Karen's eyes locked with hers, unblinking. "I understand," she said, but there was something off in her voice. "But that doesn't change the fact that it's not exactly in line with the HOA standards. I'm just suggesting that you keep it inside. Maybe in your backyard. You wouldn't want to upset anyone, would you?" The suggestion hung in the air like a threat. Sarah's breath caught. She could feel the walls closing in, the weight of Karen's stare pressing down on her. She wanted to protest, to say that Karen had no right to dictate how she lived. But instead, she forced a tight smile. "I'll think about it," Sarah said, though she had no intention of complying. Karen nodded, her lips curling into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm just looking out for the best interests of the community," she said, her voice falsely sweet. "We wouldn't want any complaints, would we?" With that, Karen turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement like the ticking of a clock counting down to something ominous. Sarah stood frozen, watching her retreat, the sense of dread growing in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And as Timmy rolled his wheelchair toward the sidewalk, oblivious to the storm brewing in the background, Sarah realized something. Karen wasn't just following the rules. She was making them. And something told her that this was only the beginning. The following day, Sarah tried to shake off the uncomfortable encounter with Karen. She told herself it was just another case of someone with too much time on their hands, trying to enforce rules that didn't matter. Timmy didn't understand the tension in the air, happily rolling his wheelchair around their front yard, the fresh autumn breeze tussling his hair. Sarah smiled at him, her heart aching with the desire to protect him from all the chaos that seemed to be closing in on their new home. But as the day wore on, Sarah couldn't ignore the unease that settled into her chest. She tried to tell herself that Karen was harmless, but there was something in the way Karen had spoken, something chilling in her tone, that she couldn't shake. The way she'd lingered on Timmy's wheelchair, her eyes narrowing in judgment. It wasn't just about the aesthetics of the neighborhood. It felt personal. The doorbell rang, shattering the silence of the afternoon. Sarah's stomach dropped. She knew exactly who it was before she even opened the door. Standing on her porch, Karen smiled, too brightly, as if trying to mask the underlying tension. In her hand, she held a clipboard, the official HOA paperwork Sarah had seen during their first meeting. "Good afternoon, Sarah," Karen said, her voice all sweetness. "I just wanted to follow up on our conversation from yesterday. You know, the one about the wheelchair. I thought I'd offer you a little reminder about the HOA guidelines, just to make sure everything's clear." Sarah swallowed her unease and forced a smile. "I remember, Karen. I'm perfectly aware of the guidelines." Karen nodded, her eyes scanning the yard as if checking for any other violations. "Of course. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. You see, I've had some concerns brought to my attention by a few neighbors. People who feel uncomfortable with certain things in our community." She paused, and Sarah could almost hear the unspoken accusation hanging in the air. "People like your son." A chill swept over Sarah. She clenched her fists to keep her hands steady. "What do you mean by people like my son?" she asked, her voice tight. "Oh, no offense, Sarah," Karen replied with an almost pitying tone. "But you have to understand, people are set in their ways. And they don't always feel comfortable when things are different. A child in a wheelchair, in a public space, it can be unsettling for some." Sarah's mind raced. The words hit harder than she expected. Unsettling. She wanted to shout, to tell Karen that Timmy had every right to be in that space, that she wouldn't let her son be pushed aside because of her narrow-minded views. But Karen's smile never wavered, and that sickening calmness in her voice made Sarah hesitate. "I'm just saying, Sarah," Karen continued, her voice a little softer now, "that it might be better if Timmy didn't roll his wheelchair out here so often. For his own good, I'm sure you can find a nice spot in your backyard for him to play, away from prying eyes. People talk, you know." The insinuation was clear. Keep your son inside or else. The weight of the threat hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Sarah's heart pounded, her face flushed with anger. How dare she? But she held herself back. There was no use getting into a confrontation. She didn't want to give Karen the satisfaction. "I'll take it under advisement," Sarah said, her voice as level as she could manage, despite the fury building inside her. Karen smiled again, but this time it didn't seem quite so sweet. "I just want what's best for you, Sarah. You know, we all have to follow the rules around here. For the good of the community, of course." The finality in Karen's words made it clear that this wasn't a casual suggestion. It was an ultimatum. As Karen turned to leave, Sarah watched her retreat down the driveway, her silhouette cutting a sharp line against the fading sunlight. The sick feeling in Sarah's stomach grew. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was trying to control them, to impose her own twisted vision of what was acceptable. What did she mean by people talk? Who had complained? The thought sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Was someone watching them? Had the wheelchair truly unsettled others, or was Karen stirring trouble for some other reason? With a deep breath, Sarah looked over at Timmy, who was still happily wheeling himself around the yard. He was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him, but Sarah knew. Things were about to get a lot harder for them both. The next morning felt eerily still, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. Sarah couldn't shake the cold feeling that had settled in her stomach after Karen's visit. It was the kind of feeling that told her something was wrong. Something was coming, and it wasn't good. She couldn't stop replaying Karen's words in her mind, the insinuation that her son's wheelchair might be unsettling to the neighbors. But what worried her more was the subtle threat Karen had made about people talking. Who exactly was Karen trying to protect? And why was she so determined to push Timmy into the shadows? Sarah spent most of the morning trying to distract herself. She cleaned the house, tidied the yard, did everything she could to avoid thinking about the looming confrontation that seemed inevitable. Timmy, as always, was in high spirits, laughing and playing with his toys on the front porch, his wheelchair spinning across the pavement with ease. By mid-afternoon, the tension had built to an unbearable level. Sarah was sitting in the living room, flicking through a magazine, when she heard a faint noise from outside, an unfamiliar sound, like a scrape followed by a thud. It was so out of place in the otherwise quiet neighborhood that her heart skipped a beat. She glanced at the window, her pulse quickening. Timmy was nowhere to be seen. The empty driveway made her blood run cold. She jumped to her feet, heart hammering in her chest as she rushed outside. Her eyes immediately sought Timmy's wheelchair. It wasn't where she'd left it. She stepped out onto the porch, scanning the yard and the street. Then she saw it, her worst nightmare. There, just a few feet from the sidewalk, lay Timmy's wheelchair, broken, twisted, and mangled beyond recognition. The wheels were bent at unnatural angles, and the frame was warped as if someone had taken a crowbar to it. The once pristine chair, the one that gave Timmy his mobility, had been reduced to nothing more than a pile of scrap metal. A pit of dread formed in Sarah's stomach as she ran toward it, her breath shallow. "Timmy," she shouted, panic rising in her voice. She spun in a circle, desperate to find him. But he wasn't anywhere in sight. He had been just a few feet away only moments ago. Where was he? Her mind raced as she scanned the neighborhood. Had someone taken him? Was he hurt? She called his name again, her voice shaking. She was about to turn back toward the house when she spotted something that made her freeze in her tracks. A shadowy figure was standing near the corner of the street, watching her. She could barely make out the face, but the silhouette was unmistakable. It was Karen. Sarah's heart thudded painfully in her chest. Karen was just standing there, her arms crossed over her chest, as if she had no part in the chaos unfolding before her. The woman's expression was unreadable, but Sarah could have sworn she saw a flash of something in her eyes. It wasn't guilt. No, it was something else. Something darker. Sarah's mind reeled. Could it have been Karen who had destroyed the wheelchair? The evidence seemed undeniable. But why? Why go to such extremes? And where was Timmy? She approached the figure slowly, her legs trembling with both fear and anger. "Did you see what happened?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Where is my son?" Karen didn't flinch. She simply smiled, a tight, controlled smile that sent a wave of revulsion through Sarah's veins. "I'm sure your son is fine," Karen said, her voice far too calm. "He probably just went inside to play." But Sarah knew something wasn't right. She glanced at the broken wheelchair again, her breath catching in her throat. No one could have just gone inside after something like this. This wasn't a random accident. It was intentional. Someone had wanted to hurt them. She turned back to Karen, But the woman was already walking away, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement as if nothing had happened. It was as if she was pretending the whole scene hadn't even occurred. "Karen," Sarah called, her voice a mix of fury and desperation. But Karen didn't turn around. She didn't even flinch. Sarah's eyes darted back to the mangled wheelchair, and an icy realization dawned on her. This wasn't just vandalism. Someone had deliberately destroyed her son's means of freedom, his lifeline. And Karen, with her cold demeanor and odd behavior, was the only person who could have done this. A sharp, cold anger surged through Sarah. Karen hadn't just broken a wheelchair. She'd broken a mother's trust, and Sarah wasn't going to let it slide. Whoever had done this was going to pay. But as Sarah turned back to find Timmy, a new fear gripped her. What if Karen had already taken it too far? The minutes after discovering Timmy's wheelchair were a blur of frantic searching and rising panic. Sarah's mind raced. Where is Timmy? What happened? Why would someone do this? She rushed inside the house, her eyes scanning every room, calling his name over and over, her voice tightening with dread. The silence that met her made her heart beat even faster. "Timmy," she cried, stumbling through the house. A dark thought slithered into her mind. What if Karen had something to do with this? The more she thought about it, the more everything seemed to point back to her. Karen's strange behavior, the veiled threats, the cold smile, it was all too much to be a coincidence. Finally, she found him. Timmy was in his room, sitting on the bed, his eyes wide with confusion. His favorite stuffed animal was clutched tightly in his hands. He looked up at her with a slight frown. "Mom, what's wrong? Why are you upset?" Timmy asked, his voice small but curious. Sarah's knees nearly gave out with relief. She rushed to him, wrapping her arms around him tightly. "Oh, thank God," she whispered, her voice shaky. She pulled away to look at him, her eyes scanning his body for any signs of harm. But he was fine. No cuts, no bruises, no scratches. Timmy was safe, but that didn't mean everything was okay. "Why are you so upset, Mommy?" Timmy asked again, his eyes filled with innocence. She tried to gather herself, wiping the tears that had started to well up in her eyes. "There's just something wrong with the wheelchair, sweetie. It's broken. Someone did something to it." Timmy blinked at her, his face unreadable. "Why would someone do that, Mommy?" The question echoed in Sarah's mind as she walked back outside, Timmy holding her hand. The broken wheelchair sat in the driveway like a symbol of her helplessness. She stood there for a moment, staring at it, her mind racing for answers. Then, with a sudden clarity, something deep inside her clicked. This wasn't just vandalism. This was a crime. She had read enough to know that under the Americans with Disabilities Act, HOA, destroying or tampering with a wheelchair or other mobility devices was considered a federal offense. It was not only a violation of personal property, but a direct attack on someone's ability to live and move freely. Her stomach churned with the realization. What had happened here wasn't just petty vandalism. It was a deliberate, malicious act with consequences. Sarah felt a cold sweat break out on the back of her neck. Karen had crossed a line. She had been so focused on the HOA rules, on the power she wielded within the community, that she'd forgotten something crucial: the law. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to piece everything together. Who could do something so cruel to a child? The answer was staring her in the face, but it wasn't enough to just have suspicions. She needed proof. She needed to take action. She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking slightly as she typed in a search for HOA violation destruction of wheelchair. She scanned the legal pages that popped up, confirming her worst fear. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute. This was a federal crime. The weight of the law hit her hard. The violation wasn't something that could be ignored or brushed off. The more she read, the more her anger burned. Destroying a wheelchair wasn't just a petty crime. It was an act of violence against someone with disabilities, someone who had the right to live with dignity and independence. And in this case, it was Timmy, her son, who had been targeted. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number for the local police. She couldn't wait any longer. She needed help. She needed to put a stop to this before Karen could get away with it. The phone rang, each tone a loud echo in her ears. When the officer finally picked up, Sarah was ready. She told him everything. The wheelchair, the threat, the strange behavior of Karen. She even mentioned the ADA violation, the laws she had just read. She didn't expect immediate action, but she hoped they would take her seriously. "What do you want us to do about it?" the officer asked, his voice neutral but weary. "I want to file a report," Sarah said, her voice steady with purpose. "I want Karen held accountable, and I want to make sure my son's rights aren't trampled on." "All right," the officer replied. "We'll look into it. Stay calm and don't do anything rash." "Rash," Sarah repeated, the anger rising in her chest. "You don't understand. Someone destroyed my son's mobility device. This is a crime. I need you to act now." The officer promised to send someone out to investigate, but Sarah didn't feel comforted. She hung up the phone, still shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. She knew Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. But now Sarah had the law on her side, and she wasn't going to back down. The following morning, Sarah stood in front of her house, her eyes locked on the driveway where Timmy's broken wheelchair lay in its mangled state. She had barely slept, the events of the previous day replaying in her mind in a never-ending loop. What had Karen hoped to achieve by destroying the chair? What kind of person would target a disabled child for no reason other than personal vendetta? The anger in Sarah's chest burned hotter with every thought. But today, she had a plan. The police would be investigating the crime, but Sarah couldn't afford to wait around for them to act. She had already taken the first step, filing a report. But now, she needed to face Karen. She had to confront the woman who had brought this all on her family and find out once and for all why. Timmy was inside, watching cartoons, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Sarah had decided to shield him from the worst of it for now. She couldn't let him see how this was affecting her, how every fiber of her being was filled with both fear and rage. She would protect him, no matter what it took. Her heart pounded as she walked to the front door, took a deep breath, and opened it. Karen's house was only a few doors down, and Sarah's steps felt heavier with each passing moment. She could see Karen's car parked in the driveway, the imposing black sedan glinting under the morning sun. It felt like a sign, like Karen was waiting, just watching, ready for the next move. As Sarah approached the house, she spotted Karen outside, gardening in her perfectly manicured front yard. Her wide-brimmed hat shielded her face, and she hummed quietly to herself as she pulled weeds with methodical precision. The scene looked so normal, so calm, that Sarah almost felt out of place. But there was nothing normal about this situation. Nothing. "Karen." Sarah's voice was sharp, cutting through the stillness of the morning air. Karen didn't look up at first, as if pretending she hadn't heard the name that came from Sarah's mouth. But Sarah wasn't having it. "I said Karen," she repeated, her voice steady but brimming with simmering anger. Finally, Karen straightened up, brushing dirt from her hands and lifting her sunglasses to peer at Sarah. The smile that spread across her face was the same thin, calculated one Sarah had seen before. Well, if it isn't the concerned mother," Karen said, her tone sweet but condescending. "To what do I owe the pleasure this time, Sarah?" Sarah took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. "Don't play games with me. You know exactly why I'm here." Karen's smile faltered, just for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "Oh, I do. Because I can't imagine what this is all about. Is it the lawn? The hedges? You know, I'm quite particular about keeping things tidy around here. Don't want the neighborhood standards slipping." "I'm not here for your standards, Karen," Sarah shot back, her hands trembling with the effort to keep her emotions in check. "I'm here because you destroyed my son's wheelchair, and I know it was you." Karen's expression changed. For a split second, her face went cold, eyes hardening, lips pressed into a thin line. Then, as quickly as the change came, it was gone. The smile was back, but this time it didn't look quite so confident. "Oh, Sarah," Karen said, shaking her head. "You don't really think I'd do something like that, do you? That's a pretty outrageous accusation." Sarah's blood ran cold, but she stood her ground. "I know exactly what happened. You've been bullying me and my son ever since we moved here. The wheelchair, you've been trying to get rid of it, trying to push Timmy out of the neighborhood. And now I know why. You've crossed a line, Karen. The legal line." Karen's face twitched, and Sarah saw it, just for a second, the crack in her facade. "Oh, don't get dramatic," Karen snapped, her voice suddenly more brittle. "You don't know what you're talking about. People around here don't like those kinds of things being so visible. You've been warned. I've been patient." Sarah felt a wave of disgust flood over her. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice growing cold. "I've been warned, but I'm not backing down. I've already spoken to the police. Destroying Timmy's wheelchair isn't just an HOA violation. It's a federal crime. And I'm going to make sure you pay for it." Karen took a step back, her eyes flashing with something dangerous. For a moment, Sarah thought Karen was about to say something, but instead, Karen just clenched her fists, her knuckles turning white. "Do you really think you'll get away with this?" Karen asked, her voice low and venomous. "You think they will believe you over me? I'm the one who's been here for years. I'm the one everyone listens to." Sarah's resolve hardened. "I don't care who you are. No one is above the law. And I'm not afraid of you anymore." For a brief, suffocating moment, they just stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. The air between them was thick with unspoken threats, with the knowledge that the game was no longer just about petty rules. It was about something far more dangerous. As Sarah turned and walked away, she knew this was far from over. Karen hadn't backed down, not by a long shot, but neither had Sarah. And now, with the weight of the law on her side, the real battle was just beginning. The sun was starting to set as Sarah walked back to her house, her heart still pounding from the confrontation with Karen. Every part of her wanted to run back, confront Karen once more, demand that she confess. But Sarah knew better than to rush in blindly. The game had changed. The stakes were higher now. She could feel the eyes of the neighbors on her, though none dared to speak to her directly. Whispers buzzed like angry bees, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Karen had somehow managed to twist the narrative in her favor. She had been the calm, collected one, while Sarah had been the overreacting mother. But Sarah wasn't worried about what they thought. She had a son to protect, and that came first. As she approached her front door, she froze. A car was parked in front of her driveway, a beat-up sit-in she didn't recognize. The figure sitting in the driver's seat was unfamiliar too. Someone with short-cropped hair, a leather jacket, and a stern expression that seemed out of place for the neighborhood. A part of her wanted to turn around, but curiosity anchored her in place. She took a deep breath and approached the car, her nerves tingling as she wondered who this person was and why they were here. Before she could knock on the window, the car door opened, and the man stepped out. He was tall, with sharp features that seemed familiar but just out of reach. He looked at her for a moment, then extended his hand. "You must be Sarah," he said, his voice low but calm. Yes. Can I help you?" she asked, still cautious. "I'm Detective Harris," he replied, flashing a badge from his jacket pocket. "I've been investigating the incident with your son's wheelchair." The words hit Sarah like a wave crashing against the shore. She blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of what was happening. Investigating. But how did he even know about the wheelchair? "Wait, she stammered, her throat dry. "How do you know about this?" Harris gave her a reassuring smile. "I've been assigned to this case. The report you filed raised some flags. I'm here to help." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "You're the police. You're really investigating." "Yes, Mom," Harris said, his expression serious. "We're taking this very seriously. Destruction of a wheelchair, particularly under the circumstances, is a federal offense. We have resources looking into Karen's activities, but I need to know exactly what happened. I need you to walk me through everything, from the beginning. Sarah's mind raced. She had known that the law would eventually catch up to Karen, but this was something entirely different. A detective was involved. Real action was happening. She had no time to lose. As she began to explain the sequence of events, the first encounter with Karen, the broken wheelchair, Karen's strange behavior, Harris listened intently. His eyes never left her face, as if searching for any inconsistencies. But there were none. Sarah had told the truth, every single detail. When she finished, Harris nodded thoughtfully. You did the right thing by coming forward. This isn't just about a broken wheelchair. There's a pattern of harassment here that we need to investigate thoroughly. And I'm not the only one looking into this. I have other officers who have already gathered evidence on Karen's previous behavior, including some disturbing reports from neighbors. Sarah's blood ran cold. She hadn't known Karen had any previous run-ins with the law or complaints from the neighbors. Her mind raced to put the pieces together. What exactly was Karen hiding? I need you to stay vigilant, Sarah, Harris continued, his voice firm. We'll be taking statements from everyone involved, and if we find enough evidence, we'll move forward with charges. In the meantime, I recommend you avoid any further confrontations with Karen. Let us handle this. We'll protect you and your son. Thank you, Sarah said, her voice shaky but filled with a renewed sense of hope. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. As Harris got back in his car, Sarah stood on her porch, trying to steady her breath. She hadn't expected to get this kind of support, not so quickly. The tension had been unbearable, but now, with a real investigation underway, things were beginning to feel like they might finally be heading in the right direction. But just as the car disappeared down the street, Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart pounding again as she saw the notification. It was an email from the HOA board. The subject line read, URGNT, Review of Neighborhood Conduct and New Policy Changes. The timing was chilling. Sarah's fingers trembled as she opened the email. As she read through it, her stomach twisted into knots. The board had officially approved a new policy, one that would allow for more strict enforcement of neighborhood rules, with additional penalties for any violations. At first, it seemed like nothing more than another bureaucratic move, but one sentence caught her eye. Any community members found in violation of ADA guidelines will be subject to fines and potentially legal action. Her mind raced. What did this mean? Was Karen already pulling strings behind the scenes? Was this just another attempt to target her and Timmy? Before Sarah could process it fully, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message from an unknown number. The message was short, chilling. You really think you've won? You've only just begun to scratch the surface, Sarah. I'll make sure you regret this. The hair on the back of Sarah's neck stood up. The message wasn't from Karen, but it might as well have been. Whoever it was, they were sending a clear message. The real battle was only just starting. Sarah could hardly believe what she was reading on her phone. The text message sent chills down her spine, and the HOA email only made things worse. She had hoped that things would be turning in her favor, that the investigation would be her ticket to justice. But this new development was a twist she hadn't seen coming. You've only just begun to scratch the surface, Sarah. I'll make sure you regret this. The message was a quiet threat, but the weight behind it was suffocating. Who was it from? The unsettling feeling gnawed at her. She didn't recognize the number, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a creeping fear that there were forces at play far beyond her control. Karen was a problem, but this felt like something darker. She stared at the phone in her hand, her pulse racing. Could Karen have orchestrated this? Had she reached out to someone, perhaps someone within the HOA, to send a veiled warning? But why? Why would Karen be so bold, so confident that Sarah would back down? The fear was no longer just about Timmy's wheelchair. It was about everything she had worked for: her family's safety, her fight for justice, and the battle against the twisted, powerful undercurrents that now seemed to be shifting against her. As if on cue, her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was an email from Detective Harris, sent only minutes after the cryptic text. She opened it quickly, hoping it contained something that would offer clarity, or at the very least, a sense of hope. The subject line was simple: Follow-up, HOA investigation. She braced herself and opened the message. "Sarah," it began, "I've been doing some digging into Karen and her associates. This is going deeper than we first anticipated. From what I've gathered, Karen is more involved in the HOA's inner workings than anyone realizes. She's been actively lobbying for stricter enforcement of neighborhood rules, and I've uncovered several instances where she has used her influence to get people in positions of power on her side. She has a network, and she's not playing by the rules." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was worse than she thought. Karen wasn't just an overbearing neighbor. She was part of a larger, more insidious operation that had far-reaching implications. Harris continued, "I need you to be careful. If Karen's behind the text messages or the HOA's new policies, she's likely escalating this war. We've already got eyes on her, but I recommend you keep your distance for now. If you can, let us handle the investigation quietly. Any more personal confrontations could make things more dangerous." The email ended with Harris's number, an invitation to reach out if she had more information, and a promise that they were on it. But Sarah couldn't wait anymore. The time for being passive was over. She stood up, her mind spinning with everything she had learned. Karen was trying to manipulate her, and not just through the HOA, but through every avenue she could control. This was more than a petty neighborhood dispute. This was an orchestrated campaign designed to break Sarah down. But Sarah wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. Her next move was clear. She would take the battle to the HOA directly. She would confront the board, expose Karen's influence, and make sure they couldn't hide behind their pretensions any longer. This was no longer just about one broken wheelchair. It was about a mother fighting for her son's rights and a community that had been twisted and controlled by one woman's insidious ambitions. As Sarah marched toward the HOA office, determination surged through her. The final confrontation was inevitable. She was done being intimidated. The phone calls, the threats, the harassment, it all ended today. She was taking the fight to the heart of the problem. But as she reached the door of the HOA office, her phone buzzed once more. This time, the message was brief, chilling, and direct. "I hope you're ready to lose. The game is just beginning, Sarah. We hold all the cards." The air around her thickened, her breath coming in short bursts. The voice behind the message was no longer just a faceless threat. It was the full weight of the HOA, Karen's hidden allies, and whatever dark forces were now aligned against her. The stakes had never been higher. Sarah clenched her fists, her mind racing with one burning thought. They think they have all the cards. Not anymore. She pushed open the door, stepping into the lion's den. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest as she stepped into the HOA office. The room felt oppressive, the air thick with unspoken tension. Behind the desk sat the HOA president, Mr. Dalton, a middle-aged man with a sharp suit and an even sharper look in his eyes. He gave her a tight smile as she walked in. The kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. One that said, "I know you're here, but I'm in control." "Sarah, always a pleasure," Mr. Dalton said, his voice smooth but laced with an edge. "What can I do for you today?" Sarah didn't waste time with pleasantries. She had no interest in games. "I'm here to talk about the new policy that's been put in place. The one that targets people like my son." Dalton's smile faltered, but only slightly. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do." Sarah shot back, her voice cold, her eyes never leaving his. "I've seen the new rules you've put in place. The ones that are designed to punish people for things they can't control, like disabilities." Dalton's eyebrows arched. "You're being a little dramatic, don't you think?" "No," Sarah said firmly. "What's dramatic is watching someone try to tear apart my family over a wheelchair. You've been getting reports about my son, about the wheelchair. And I know Karen's behind this. She's used her position to manipulate the board, to make sure that I'm silenced." Dalton's face tightened. "I'm afraid you don't have all the facts, Sarah. Karen has been a dedicated member of this community for years. She's done a lot of good." "I'm not interested in her good deeds," Sarah snapped. "She's a bully. And she's been using the HOA to force her narrow views on this entire neighborhood. But it's not just Karen, is it? You and the rest of the board have been complicit." Dalton's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, he looked uncomfortable. "You have no idea what you're accusing us of, Sarah." "I know enough," Sarah countered, her voice hard. "And I'm not leaving here without getting answers." Just as the tension in the room reached its breaking point, the door opened, and Detective Harris walked in, his presence like a breath of fresh air in the suffocating room. His eyes locked onto Dalton's, and for a moment, Sarah saw something flicker in Dalton's expression, something that could only be described as fear. "Mr. Dalton," Harris said, his voice calm but carrying a weight of authority. "We need to talk." Dalton's confident mask slipped. "Detective Harris, I didn't expect." "Don't play games," Harris interrupted, stepping forward. "We've been investigating Karen's activities, and I'm sure you know this already, but destruction of a wheelchair isn't just a civil matter. It's a federal crime. And using the HOA to further personal vendettas, that's another matter entirely." Sarah's pulse quickened. The detective's presence changed everything. This was real. It was happening. Dalton's expression hardened as he stood up, his voice rising. "You don't know what you're getting into, Harris. This is a matter of community values. We've been trying to keep this neighborhood safe, and people like Sarah and her son, they disrupt that balance." "Safe." Sarah's voice was a knife. "You've been hiding behind community values to tear down anyone who doesn't fit your narrow view of the world. My son is disabled. He didn't ask for any of this, and neither did I. But you've been harassing us, targeting us for being different. And now you're trying to use the HOA to keep us in line." Dalton took a step forward, his fists clenched. "You're making a huge mistake, Sarah. I'm not going to let you ruin everything I've worked for." Before Dalton could say another word, Detective Harris spoke again. "I think it's time we get the rest of the board in here. Let's see how they feel about your actions, shall we?" The door swung open again, and 2 more officers walked in. Dalton paled, his eyes darting between the officers, the detective, and Sarah. The moment of power had shifted. What had seemed like an impossible fight for Sarah was now becoming a tidal wave, and Karen and the HOA board were caught in its current. The officers wasted no time. "Mr. Dalton, you're under investigation for corruption, abuse of power, and harassment. You and the board will be interviewed, and if the evidence leads to it, charges will be pressed. You're not getting out of this one." Dalton's face twisted with rage, but there was nothing he could do. His hand shook with the realization that his carefully constructed empire of control was crumbling, piece by piece. And then it hit Sarah, a moment of pure, unfiltered satisfaction. The truth had been exposed, the weight of it impossible to deny. Karen's influence, the HOA's complicity, the manipulation, and the harassment, they were all laid bare. The law had caught up with them. As the officers began to escort Dalton out of the room, Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had stood up for her son, for justice, and for the truth. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a glimmer of peace. Her phone buzzed once more, but this time, it wasn't a threat. It was a message from Detective Harris. "It's over. You've won." For the first time in a long time, Sarah allowed herself to smile.